12-year-old Daniel sat in the last row of his 7th grade classroom. His notebook open but his eyes fixed on the clock hanging above the whiteboard. The second hand was stuck. It had been stuck for 3 days now, frozen at the 15-second mark, and it was driving him crazy, not because he needed to know the exact time, but because he knew exactly why it was stuck and exactly how to fix it. His classmates never seemed to notice these things. While they chatted about weekend plans and the latest video games, Daniel's mind wandered to broken things. The squeaky door hinge in the hallway that needed oil, the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom that probably had a loose ballast, the water fountain that dribbled instead of arced because someone had twisted the nozzle the wrong way. It wasn't that Daniel was trying to find problems everywhere. He just saw them. His brain worked that way, always had. While other kids looked at a pencil sharpener and saw a tool, Daniel saw gears and blades and a simple motor that could jam if you pushed too hard. When his teachers talked about angles in geometry class, he thought about the hinges on doors and how everything in the world moved on angles and pivots. His dad said he got it from his mom. She'd been the same way, always fixing things around their small apartment, always teaching Daniel how machines worked from the time he could barely walk. She'd passed away 4 years ago, but her lessons stayed with him. Now it was just Daniel and his dad, who worked double shifts at the textile factory across town. Their apartment was old and things broke constantly. Daniel had learned to fix the toilet when it ran, repair the toaster when it stopped heating evenly, and even patch the cracks in the plaster walls using tutorial videos in his mom's old toolbox. At school, though nobody really knew about any of that, Daniel was quiet. Not shy exactly, just quiet. He didn't raise his hand much in class unless he was absolutely sure of an answer. He ate lunch with a small group of friends but rarely said more than a few sentences. Teachers sometimes forgot he was there, which bothered him less than it probably should have. The school building itself was ancient. 70 years old according to the bronze plaque near the front entrance. Everything about the place felt tired. Paint peeled in the stairwells. Tiles cracked in the cafeteria. Lockers jammed regularly. The heating system clanged and hissed like an angry metal monster every morning. But Daniel had grown to love the old building in a strange way. It was like a giant puzzle, full of mechanical problems waiting to be solved. The biggest problem lately, though, wasn't something Daniel could easily access. The bell system had stopped working 3 weeks ago. Just stopped, completely silent. Every morning, students relied on their phones or teachers' watches to know when class started. There were no warning bells, no end-of-period bells, no lunch bells. The whole school schedule felt off balance, like trying to dance without music. Daniel's friend Tommy had been marked late to class 8 times already because he kept losing track of time between periods. Mrs. Patterson, their English teacher, kept running her lessons too long and making everyone late to their next class. The gym teacher had started using a whistle to signal the end of PE, which echoed horribly in the gymnasium and gave everyone a headache. The silence where the bells should be felt wrong. Daniel noticed it more than most. His brain craved patterns and rhythms, and the missing bells threw everything off. He'd asked Mr. Willis, the science teacher, about it during lab one day. "District says maintenance will get to it eventually," Mr. Willis had said, shaking his head. "Budget cuts mean we're low priority. Could be months before they send someone." Months. Daniel had thought about that word for days. Months of confusion, months of tardiness, months of chaos, all because of a broken bell system that probably needed something simple. A loose wire, a blown fuse, maybe a corroded connection somewhere in the ancient wiring. He'd started paying attention to the speakers mounted in each hallway. There were 6 of them total throughout the school, old metal boxes with grills covering the speakers inside. They hung near the ceilings, dusty and forgotten. One of them, the one closest to the main office, hung slightly crooked. Daniel noticed it every single day when he walked past. Last Thursday, he'd stayed after school pretending to get books from his locker, but really just staring up at that crooked speaker. The hallway was empty, quiet in a way that school never was during the day. He'd dragged a chair over from an empty classroom, stood on it, and examined the speaker box up close for the first time. The metal was old, but sturdy. There were 4 screws holding the cover on, Phillips head easy to remove. Through the grill, he could see wiring inside. And right there, visible even without opening it, was a wire that had come loose from its connection point, just hanging there, not quite touching where it needed to touch. Daniel's fingers had actually tingled looking at it. Such a simple problem. Maybe 5 minutes to fix if someone would just let him try. That's when Principal Howard's voice had boomed down the hallway, making Daniel nearly fall off the chair. "What do you think you're doing up there, young man?" Daniel had climbed down fast, his face burning hot. Principal Howard was a big man with a deep voice, the kind of principal who seemed to take up the whole hallway when he walked. "I was just looking at the speaker, sir. I think I might know why the bells aren't working." Principal Howard's expression had shifted from surprise to something sterner. "Son, that's school property. You can't just climb up and start messing with electrical equipment. That's a liability issue. Maintenance will handle it when they can. But I can see the problem, sir. There's a loose wire and it would only take— No." The principal's voice was firm. "I appreciate your curiosity, but this isn't something students handle. Now head on home. It's getting late." Daniel had walked home that day feeling something heavy in his chest. Not anger exactly, but frustration mixed with something else. Helplessness, maybe. He'd seen the problem. He knew how to fix it. He had the skills and the knowledge. But because he was 12, because he was just a student, because he was quiet Daniel from the back row, nobody would even consider listening to him. That night, he'd lain in bed staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom. The walls were covered with his drawings, sketches of machines, diagrams of how things worked, notes from tutorial videos he'd watched. His mom's old toolbox sat on his desk, tools organized exactly the way she'd taught him. His dad had come home late from his shift, exhausted as always, and had poked his head into Daniel's room. "You okay, kiddo? You seem bothered by something." Daniel had almost told him everything, almost explained about the bells and the wire and Principal Howard. But his dad looked so tired, his shoulders bent from hours of standing at factory machines. So Daniel had just said, "I'm fine, Dad, just thinking about a school project," but he wasn't fine. Over the weekend, he couldn't stop thinking about that loose wire. On Monday morning, walking into school, he'd heard teachers in the hallway talking in frustrated whispers. The district had pushed back the repair timeline. Again. Another month at least. Maybe longer. Some other school had a broken boiler, and that took priority over bells that didn't ring. Daniel had sat through his morning classes barely hearing a word. He kept thinking about all the students who'd be marked late. All the confusion, all the wasted time and frustration. He thought about that loose wire still hanging there, still not touching where it needed to touch. And he thought about something his mom used to say, back when she was teaching him to fix things. "Sometimes, Danny, knowing how to solve a problem isn't enough. You also have to find someone who will let you try." He hadn't understood what she meant back then, but sitting in that classroom watching the broken clock above the whiteboard, its second hand still frozen, he finally got it. Skills didn't matter if nobody believed you had them. Knowledge didn't matter if nobody thought you were old enough or important enough to use it. The bell should have rung to signal the end of first period. Instead, there was only silence, and Mrs. Patterson had to check her watch and dismiss them herself. Daniel gathered his books and headed to second period, that heavy feeling still sitting in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The week dragged on like it was moving through mud. Every time Daniel walked past that crooked speaker in the hallway, he felt that same frustrated tightness in his chest. The loose wire was right there, visible through the grill if you knew where to look. Such a simple fix. But Principal Howard's words kept echoing in his head. That's not something students handle. By Wednesday, the bell situation was getting worse instead of better. Daniel's friend Tommy had received 2 detentions for being late to class. He'd been late because he was all the way across the building at his locker when his previous class ran long, and without bells he had no warning. When Tommy had tried to explain, the teacher hadn't cared. Rules were rules. Late was late. "It's not fair," Tommy had complained at lunch, picking at his pizza. "How am I supposed to know when class ends if there's no bell? Am I supposed to just stare at the clock the whole time?" Daniel had wanted to say something, wanted to tell Tommy about the loose wire, about how easy it would be to fix. But what was the point? Nobody was going to listen to a kid about fixing electrical systems. Adults had made that clear. The worst part was watching the teachers get frustrated too. Mr. Ramirez, the music teacher, had completely given up on his lesson plans. He taught band and orchestra, and timing was everything in music. But without bells to structure the day, students wandered in late, and he never knew exactly when to wrap things up. On Wednesday, he'd been in the middle of teaching a difficult piece when half the orchestra suddenly got up and left. realizing they were already late to their next class. Daniel had stayed behind to help put away music stands, something he did sometimes when he wanted a quiet moment before facing the crowded hallways. Mr. Ramirez had been standing at his conductor's podium, shoulders slumped, looking defeated in a way Daniel had never seen before. "You okay, Mr. Ramirez?" Daniel had asked quietly. The teacher had looked up, seeming surprised Daniel was still there. "Oh, hey, Daniel. Yeah, I'm fine. Just frustrated. I can't teach music when nobody knows what time it is. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra where nobody can hear the same beat." Daniel had nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Structure mattered. Rhythm mattered. The silence where the bells should be was messing up everyone's rhythm. That afternoon, during his last period study hall, Daniel had sat by the window watching the maintenance building across the parking lot. The district office was supposed to send someone to fix the bells, but when? He'd overheard the secretary on the phone that morning, her voice tight with frustration, explaining again that yes, the bells were still broken, and yes, it was causing problems, and no, she didn't know when someone would come. Daniel pulled out his notebook and started sketching. Not the homework he was supposed to be doing, but a diagram of the school's bell system as he understood it. The main control box would be in the office, connected to wires running through the walls to each speaker. One central signal going out to multiple endpoints. Basic parallel circuit design. If one speaker had a loose wire, it might cause the whole system to malfunction depending on how it was wired. Or maybe the problem was in the control box itself. Without actually looking, he couldn't be sure. His pencil moved faster, working through possibilities. He drew different wiring configurations, marked where problems might occur, noted which tools he'd need to diagnose each possibility. His mom had taught him to think through repairs like this. Make a plan. Consider the options. Don't just start randomly unscrewing things and hoping for the best. "Daniel Chen, what's that you're working on?" He looked up to find Mrs. Anderson, the study hall monitor, standing beside his desk. She was looking at his diagram with curiosity, not suspicion. "Just sketching," he said, starting to close the notebook. "Wait, is that the school bell system?" She leaned closer. "Can I see?" Daniel hesitated, then opened the notebook again. Mrs. Anderson studied his diagram, her finger tracing the lines he'd drawn. "This is impressive," she said slowly. "Do you actually understand how this works?" "Yes, ma'am. My mom used to teach me about electrical systems, and I've been thinking about why our bells stopped working." Mrs. Anderson pulled up a chair and sat down, which surprised Daniel. Teachers didn't usually sit with students during study hall unless something was wrong. "Okay, explain it to me. Why do you think they stopped?" Daniel felt a flutter of nervousness, but pushed through it. "Well, it could be a few things. Most likely is a loose connection somewhere, either at a speaker or in the main control box. Could also be a blown fuse or a tripped breaker, or maybe the timer mechanism failed if it's an old system. But the easiest thing to check first would be the individual speakers, because if one has a short or a loose wire, depending on how they're wired, it could interrupt the signal to all of them." Mrs. Anderson was quiet for a moment, looking at him differently than teachers usually did. "Have you told anyone about this?" "Principal Howard? The office staff?" Daniel felt his face get hot. "I tried. Principal Howard found me looking at one of the speakers last week. He told me to stay away from school property. Looking at it or trying to fix it. Just looking. I could see a loose wire through the grill, but he didn't want to hear about it." Daniel's voice came out smaller than he wanted. "He said maintenance would handle it." Mrs. Anderson sighed, and Daniel could tell she was choosing her words carefully. "Daniel, I understand why you're frustrated. And between you and me, I think it's ridiculous that we're waiting months for a repair that might be simple. But Principal Howard has rules he has to follow. Liability issues, insurance, district policy. If a student got hurt working on electrical equipment, even if they knew what they were doing, the school could face serious legal problems." "I wouldn't get hurt," Daniel said quietly. "I know what I'm doing." "I believe you," Mrs. Anderson said, and she sounded like she meant it. "But it's not about whether you're competent. It's about policy and risk and all the adult complications that shouldn't matter but do." She looked at his diagram again. "Though I'll tell you what. Let me talk to some people. Maybe there's a way to get maintenance here faster. And maybe, if the problem really is as simple as you think, someone could look into it with your guidance." Daniel wanted to feel hopeful, but he'd learned not to expect much. "Still," he said, Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. She stood up, patted his shoulder, and went back to her desk. Daniel stared at his diagram for a while longer, then closed the notebook. What was the point of knowing how to fix something if nobody would let you try? Thursday morning brought a new frustration. The school district had sent out an email to all families explaining that the bell system repairs were being postponed indefinitely due to budget constraints. They apologized for the inconvenience and asked for patience and understanding. Daniel's dad had read the email at breakfast, shaking his head. Indefinitely, his dad had muttered. That's a fancy way of saying never. At school that day, the mood felt heavier. Teachers were snappier, students more confused. The lack of bells had stopped feeling like a temporary inconvenience and started feeling permanent. This was just how things were going to be now. Broken, with nobody willing or able to fix it. Daniel moved through his classes in a fog. In science, he barely heard Mr. Willis's lecture about electrical circuits, which was ironic given that he was sitting there thinking about the exact kind of circuit problem the school had. In English, he read the same paragraph of his book 4 times without absorbing a single word. His mind kept circling back to that loose wire, hanging there in the speaker box, not touching where it needed to touch. At lunch, he sat with his usual group, but didn't contribute to the conversation. Tommy was complaining about getting another detention. Lisa was frustrated because she'd missed the start of a quiz in math. Everyone was annoyed, and Daniel just sat there knowing he could help but having no way to actually do it. "You're quiet today," Tommy said, nudging him. "More than usual, I mean." Daniel shrugged. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About being invisible. About knowing things nobody cared about. About his mom who would have known what to do in this situation." But he just said, "Nothing important." After lunch, walking to his next class, Daniel took his usual route past the crooked speaker. He'd probably walked past it 100 times since Principal Howard had told him to stay away. Each time it felt like the building itself was asking for help that he couldn't give. Today, though, something was different. As Daniel approached, he saw someone standing beneath the speaker. Mr. Ramirez, the music teacher. He had a small stepladder and what looked like a toolkit, and he was staring up at the speaker with the same frustrated expression Daniel had seen on his face the other day. Daniel slowed down, watching. Mr. Ramirez climbed the first 2 steps of the ladder, reaching up toward the speaker. But even with the ladder, he was too short to comfortably reach it. He stretched, his fingers barely touching the metal grill, then climbed down with a sigh. Daniel stood there for a long moment, his heart beating faster. His mom's voice echoed in his head again. "Sometimes, Danny, knowing how to solve a problem isn't enough. You also have to find someone who will let you try." Before he could overthink it, Daniel walked over. "Mr. Ramirez?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Do you need help?" The music teacher turned, looking surprised and slightly embarrassed. "Oh, hey, Daniel. I was thinking, maybe I could take a look at this speaker myself. I used to fix amplifiers and sound equipment for my band back in college, but I can't quite reach it, and honestly, I probably shouldn't be messing with school property anyway." Daniel's mouth felt dry, but he made himself speak. "I think there's a loose wire inside. I saw it last week, and the connection points probably need cleaning. Corrosion builds up on old electrical contacts." Mr. Ramirez looked at him more closely. "How do you know that?" "My dad's an electrician, industrial wiring mostly. He's been teaching me since I was little, and my mom used to fix things too before she passed away." Daniel paused. "I know how to do this. I could fix it if someone would let me reach it." For a long moment, Mr. Ramirez just stared at him. Daniel could practically see him thinking through the implications, weighing the rules against the obvious need. Finally, the teacher said, "If you could actually fix this, it would change everything. No more chaos. No more frustrated teachers and late students, just normalcy again." "I can fix it," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. "I'm pretty sure I can." Mr. Ramirez stood there for what felt like forever, his hand resting on the stepladder, looking between Daniel and the broken speaker. Daniel could see the internal struggle playing out on the teacher's face. Rules versus need, policy versus problem solving, fear of consequences versus the simple desire to make something work again. Finally, Mr. Ramirez said, "Okay, but I need to be completely clear here. If we do this, I'm taking full responsibility. If Principal Howard asks, if anyone asks, you tell them I made the decision and I supervised everything. Understood? Daniel nodded quickly. Yes, sir. And if at any point something seems unsafe or you're not sure about something, we stop immediately. Deal? Deal. Mr. Ramirez glanced down the hallway. Classes were in session, so it was empty. All right, then. Let's do this fast before someone comes along and stops us. Daniel felt his heart racing as Mr. Ramirez steadied the stepladder. This was actually happening. After weeks of frustration, after being told no, after feeling invisible and helpless, someone was finally letting him try. He climbed the ladder carefully, Mr. Ramirez holding it steady at the base. Up close, the speaker box looked even older than Daniel had thought. The metal was scratched and dented from decades of students throwing things or maintenance workers bumping it with ladders. A layer of dust covered everything. What do you need? Mr. Ramirez asked from below. Phillips head screwdriver, small or medium size. And do you have any steel wool or a wire brush in that toolkit? Mr. Ramirez rummaged through his bag and handed up a screwdriver. No steel wool, but I've got this. It was a small brass brush, the kind used for cleaning instrument valves. Will that work? Perfect, Daniel said, taking it. His hands were steadier than he'd expected as he removed the 4 screws holding the speaker grill in place. Years of watching his dad work, years of his mom's patient teaching, all of it came back to him in this moment. Take your time. Don't force anything. Pay attention to what you're seeing. The grill came off easily and Daniel set it on top of the speaker box. Inside was exactly what he'd glimpsed through the metal mesh. The speaker itself circular and dusty with wires running to connection terminals. And there, just as he'd seen before, was a red wire that had pulled loose from its terminal. But now that he could see everything clearly, he spotted a second problem. The connection points where the wires attached were covered in a greenish-white coating. Corrosion, just like he'd suspected. That crusty buildup would prevent proper electrical contact even if the wire was connected. What do you see? Mr. Ramirez called up. Loose wire, like I thought, and heavy corrosion on the terminals. I need to clean them first before reconnecting anything. Can you do it? Daniel didn't answer with words. Instead, he carefully used the brass brush to scrub the corroded terminals. The green coating flaked away, revealing clean metal underneath. His dad had taught him this. Corrosion on electrical connections was like rust on metal. You had to get down to the clean surface for electricity to flow properly. As he worked, Daniel felt something shift inside him. The nervousness faded, replaced by focus. This was what he was good at. This made sense in a way that classroom lectures and standardized tests never quite did. His hands understood this language of wires and connections, of problems and solutions. How's it going up there? Mr. Ramirez sounded nervous. Almost done cleaning the terminals. Then I just need to reconnect the wire. Daniel brushed away the last of the corrosion. The metal gleamed clean now. He picked up the loose red wire and examined its end. The copper was slightly bent, but still good. He straightened it carefully, then aligned it with the terminal marked speaker out in faded lettering. His mom's voice echoed in his memory. When you're connecting wires, Danny, make sure they're tight. Loose connections cause problems. But don't over-tighten either. Just firm and secure. Daniel tightened the connection carefully, checking it twice to make sure it wouldn't come loose again. Then he inspected the black wire on the other terminal. It was still connected, but he cleaned that terminal too and tightened the connection just to be safe. Okay, he called down. Everything's reconnected. The wiring looks good now, so it should work? If the problem was just this speaker, then yes. But we won't know until someone tests the system. Let me replace that grill and we'll find out. Mr. Ramirez handed the screwdriver back up, and Daniel carefully reattached the metal cover, making sure each screw was secure. When he climbed down, his legs felt shaky. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. He'd done it. He'd actually fixed it. Mr. Ramirez was looking at him with something like amazement. You made that look easy. It was easy, Daniel said honestly. Once you could see the problem, I mean. The hard part was getting permission to look. Mr. Ramirez nodded slowly, understanding what Daniel really meant. Then he gathered his tools. Come with me to the office. We need to ask Mrs. Patterson at the front desk to test the bell system. They walked down the hallway together and Daniel felt like he was floating. Every step felt unreal. When they pushed through the office doors, the secretary looked up from her computer with surprise. Mr. Ramirez, is something wrong? Actually, we're hoping something's right now. Could you do me a favor and test the bell system? Mrs. Patterson looked confused. The bell system? It's been broken for weeks, I know. Just humor me, please. She shrugged and reached for something beneath her desk. Daniel held his breath. This was it. Either he'd fixed it, or he'd just wasted everyone's time and possibly gotten Mr. Ramirez in trouble. Mrs. Patterson pressed a button. For a moment, nothing happened. Daniel's heart sank. Maybe the problem was somewhere else. Maybe he'd reconnected the wrong wire. Maybe, and then it rang. Clear and bright and perfect, the sound filled the hallway. The bell that had been silent for nearly a month suddenly sang out, and it was the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard. Mrs. Patterson's mouth dropped open. How did you... But she didn't finish the question because doors started opening. Students poured into the hallway, looking around in confusion and delight. Teachers emerged from classrooms with expressions of shock. The sound kept ringing, that familiar tone that meant end of period. Time to move. Structure restored. It's working, someone shouted. The bell's back. Finally! Mr. Ramirez was grinning, and when he looked at Daniel, his eyes were actually a little wet. You did it. But Daniel was looking past him down the hallway where Principal Howard was striding toward them with quick, purposeful steps. The principal's expression was impossible to read. Confused, certainly. But was he angry, pleased? Daniel couldn't tell. Principal Howard stopped in front of them, looked at the ceiling speaker, then at Mr. Ramirez, then down at Daniel. The hallway was still full of celebrating students, but the noise seemed to fade as everyone waited to see what the principal would say. Mr. Ramirez, Principal Howard said slowly, did you fix our bell system? The music teacher stood up straighter. Sir, I need to be clear about this. Yes, I made the decision to try, and yes, I take full responsibility. But Daniel here is the one who actually diagnosed and fixed the problem. He knew exactly what was wrong and exactly how to fix it. Principal Howard's gaze shifted to Daniel, and Daniel felt his stomach clench. He remembered the principal's stern words from last week. Stay away from school property. Maintenance will handle it. This isn't something students do. Son, Principal Howard said, and his voice was softer than Daniel expected. Last week when I found you on that chair looking at the speaker, you tried to tell me something. What was it? Daniel's voice came out quiet. I tried to tell you I could see what was wrong, that I thought I could fix it, and I didn't listen. No, sir. Principal Howard was quiet for a moment, looking around at the hallway full of students and teachers, all of them waiting to hear what would happen next. When he spoke again, his voice carried down the corridor. I owe you an apology, Daniel. You tried to help and I shut you down without even hearing what you had to say. That was wrong of me. He extended his hand. Thank you for fixing our bell. The entire school thanks you. Daniel shook the principal's hand, hardly believing this was happening. Principal Howard's grip was firm and warm. I'd like to know more about how you learned to do this, the principal continued. And I'd like to talk about some other things around the school that might need attention. Would you be willing to stop by my office after school today? Yes, sir, Daniel managed to say. The bell rang again, signaling the official end of the period, and this time everyone cheered. Tommy pushed through the crowd and clapped Daniel on the shoulder. Dude, you fixed the bell? That's incredible. Lisa was there too, smiling. I heard someone in the office saying your name. You actually did it? Daniel nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. The crowd swirled around him, students offering congratulations, teachers stopping to thank him. Mrs. Anderson appeared and gave him a knowing smile. I talked to some people, she said quietly. But it looks like you and Mr. Ramirez beat me to it. Mr. Ramirez was explaining to a group of teachers what had happened, how Daniel had diagnosed the problem and made the repair. Daniel heard him say corroded terminals and loose connection, and felt proud that the teacher was explaining it accurately, not dumbing it down. But the moment that stuck with Daniel, the one that would replay in his mind for years to come, was Principal Howard pulling Mr. Ramirez aside. Daniel was close enough to hear them. That took courage, the principal said, going against protocol to solve a problem. Sometimes rules get in the way of common sense, Mr. Ramirez replied. That kid knew what he was doing. All he needed was someone to believe in him enough to let him try. Principal Howard nodded thoughtfully. You're right. And maybe that's the lesson here. We have students with all kinds of talents, and sometimes we're so busy following procedures that we forget to actually see what they're capable of. The hallway was clearing now, students heading to their next classes, the excitement settling into a new normal. A normal where the bells worked again, where structure was restored, where Daniel Chen was no longer invisible. As Daniel gathered his backpack and prepared for his next class, he caught his reflection in the glass of the office door. He looked the same as always. Quiet, unassuming, easy to overlook. But something inside him had changed. He'd found his voice not by speaking louder but by showing what he could do, and people had finally listened. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Daniel tried to focus on his afternoon classes, but his mind kept replaying everything that had happened. The look on Mr. Ramirez's face when the bell rang, the sound of students cheering, Principal Howard's handshake and apology. It all felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. In math class, Mrs. Porter stopped her lesson about fractions to address the room. "I just want to say how wonderful it is to hear those bells again. And I heard it was one of our own students who fixed them. Daniel, would you stand up for a moment?" Daniel felt his face burn hot as everyone turned to look at him. Slowly he stood and the class erupted in applause. Tommy was whooping and clapping the loudest. Even the kids who barely knew Daniel's name were smiling and clapping. Mrs. Porter was beaming at him like he'd just won a national science competition. "Let's hear it for students who use their talents to help others," she said warmly. Daniel sat down as quickly as he could, his heart pounding. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. Part of him wanted to sink into the floor and disappear, but another part of him, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, felt proud. Not loud or boastful pride, but quiet satisfaction. He'd done something that mattered. When the final bell rang at the end of the day, it wasn't just a sound anymore. It was proof. Proof that Daniel had made a difference. Proof that quiet competence mattered. Proof that knowing how to fix things was a valuable skill, even if you were just a kid. He gathered his things slowly, remembering that Principal Howard had asked him to stop by the office. Daniel wasn't sure what to expect. More thanks, probably. Maybe some questions about how he'd learned to do repairs. Part of him wondered if he might actually be in trouble despite the principal's kind words. Rules were rules, and he'd technically climbed a ladder and messed with school property without official permission. The office was quieter now. With most students already heading home, Mrs. Patterson smiled when she saw him. "Daniel, go right in. Principal Howard is expecting you." Daniel knocked softly on the principal's door and heard a warm, "Come in." Principal Howard's office was bigger than Daniel expected, with tall windows overlooking the school parking lot. The walls were covered with photos of graduating classes going back decades, and there were certificates and awards in frames. The principal sat behind a large desk but gestured for Daniel to take one of the comfortable chairs facing him. "Have a seat, Daniel. Thanks for coming by." Daniel sat down, his backpack in his lap like a shield. Principal Howard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I wanted to talk to you properly, away from all the commotion in the hallway. First, I want to apologize again for how I handled things last week. You were trying to help and I shut you down without even considering what you were saying. That wasn't fair to you." "It's okay," Daniel said quietly. "I know you have rules to follow." "Rules exist for good reasons," Principal Howard agreed. "But sometimes we get so focused on following rules that we forget why they exist in the first place. We're supposed to create a safe environment where students can learn and grow. The rule about students not touching electrical equipment exists to keep you safe. But in this case, the rule prevented us from solving a problem we desperately needed solved." He pulled out a file folder and opened it. "I called your father at work. Hope you don't mind. I wanted his permission to talk to you about something." Daniel's stomach flipped. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. In fact, quite the opposite." Principal Howard smiled. "Your father told me that you've been fixing things at home since you were very young, that your mother taught you before she passed away, and that he's continued that education. He says you're better with tools and repairs than most adults he knows." Daniel felt his throat tighten at the mention of his mom. She was really good at fixing things. "It sounds like she passed that gift on to you. And your father is very proud of you, by the way. He wanted me to tell you that." Daniel had to blink several times. His dad wasn't big on expressing emotions. They showed love through actions more than words. Knowing his dad had said that made Daniel's chest feel warm and tight at the same time. Principal Howard continued, "Here's what I'm thinking. This school has been around for 70 years, and as you've probably noticed, things break constantly. We have a maintenance budget, but it's limited. The district sends someone for major repairs, but small things often get ignored or take months to address." "That broken clock in your classroom?" Been stuck for 2 months. The squeaky door in the science wing. 6 months. The flickering light in the second-floor bathroom. Almost a year. Daniel had noticed all of those things. Of course he had. What if, Principal Howard said carefully, we created a position for you. Nothing that would interfere with your schoolwork, of course. But maybe once or twice a week, during study hall or after school, you could help identify and fix minor problems around the building. We'd pay you a small stipend, get proper insurance coverage, and make sure everything is done safely and legally. Your father would need to sign off, and we'd have clear guidelines about what kinds of repairs are appropriate for a student to handle. Daniel stared at him. You want to hire me to fix things at the school? Only if you're interested. And only with your father's approval. But yes, that's what I'm proposing. You clearly have the skills, and we clearly need the help. Seems like it could benefit everyone. Daniel's mind was racing. A real job, at school. Doing what he loved. Getting paid to solve problems instead of just sitting in study hall pretending to do homework while he sketched diagrams in his notebook. I'd want to, Daniel said, then corrected himself. I'd really like to. If my dad says it's okay. He already said yes, Principal Howard said with a grin. I called him before I asked you. He thinks it's a great idea. Says it'll be good for you to have an official role and to see that your skills have real value. Daniel couldn't quite process it all. This morning he'd been invisible Daniel from the back row. Now he had a job, a purpose, recognition. There's one condition, Principal Howard added. Your grades can't slip. School comes first. If I see your homework suffering or your test scores dropping, we'll need to reevaluate. Deal? Deal, Daniel said immediately. His grades were decent, not amazing, but solid. He could keep them there. Excellent. I'll draw up the paperwork this week. Plan on starting next Monday. Principal Howard stood and extended his hand again. Welcome to the team, Daniel. Walking out of the school that afternoon, Daniel felt like he was floating 6 inches off the ground. The autumn air was crisp, and the afternoon sun painted everything golden. Students were scattered across the parking lot and front lawn, waiting for rides or walking home in groups. Tommy caught up with him near the front gates. Hey, what did Principal Howard want? He offered me a job, Daniel said, still barely believing it himself. A job? Doing what? Fixing things around the school. Like maintenance, but part-time. While I'm still a student, Tommy's eyes went wide. That's so cool. You're like officially the school repair guy now? Daniel laughed. I guess so. Man, you went from nobody knowing your name to being famous in like one day. Daniel didn't think he was famous exactly, but he understood what Tommy meant. For years, he'd been background noise in his own life. Now people saw him. Not just saw him physically, but saw what he could do, saw his value. They walked together for a few blocks before Tommy turned off toward his street. See you tomorrow, Daniel the bell fixer. See you tomorrow, Daniel called back, smiling. He walked the rest of the way home alone, taking his time. The neighborhood was familiar, but somehow looked different today. He noticed the slightly crooked mailbox on Mr. Peterson's lawn, the loose gutter on the corner store, the wobbly bike rack outside the library. Problems everywhere just waiting to be solved. When he got home, his dad's work truck wasn't in the driveway yet. Still at the factory, Daniel let himself in with his key and dropped his backpack on the couch. He went to his room and sat on the bed, looking around at his drawings on the walls, all those sketches of machines and circuits and mechanical systems, all that knowledge he'd been collecting, not sure if it would ever matter to anyone. Now it mattered. Now people knew. His phone buzzed with a text from his dad. Principal called me at work. So proud of you, kiddo. Your mom would be too. We'll celebrate when I get home. Daniel read the message 3 times, his eyes getting wet. His dad rarely sent texts like that. The fact that he'd taken time during his shift to write it meant everything. Later that evening, his dad came home with pizza and soda, their usual Friday night treat even though it was only Thursday. They ate at their small kitchen table and Daniel told him everything. About the loose wire, about Mr. Ramirez taking a chance on him, about Principal Howard's apology and the job offer, about the applause in the hallway. His dad listened to all of it, nodding occasionally, a small smile on his tired face. When Daniel finished, his dad reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. Your mom used to say that everyone has something they're meant to be good at. She said the trick was finding it and having the courage to use it, even when people doubted you. His dad's voice was rough with emotion. You found your thing, Danny. And today you showed everyone what you're capable of. That takes courage. I was scared, Daniel admitted. When I was up on that ladder, I was scared I'd mess up. That I'd be wrong about the wire. That I'd make things worse. That's what courage is, his dad said. Being scared but doing it anyway because it's the right thing to do. Because someone needs help and you know how to help them. They finished their pizza in comfortable silence, and then his dad pulled out the old toolbox from the hall closet. His mom's toolbox, the one Daniel had been using for years. I want you to have this officially, his dad said. Not just borrowing it, but having it as your own. You've earned it. Daniel ran his fingers over the scratched metal surface, remembering his mom's hands on these same tools. Teaching him, guiding him, believing in him. Thanks, Dad. That night, Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day one more time. The fear of climbing the ladder. The satisfaction of cleaning those terminals. The beautiful sound of the bell ringing. Principal Howard's handshake. His dad's pride. Tomorrow he'd go back to school and things would be different. He'd still be quiet Daniel who sat in the back row. But now he'd also be Daniel who fixed the bell. Daniel who had a job. Daniel whose skills mattered. He thought about all the broken things in the school, all the problems waiting to be solved. The stuck clock, the squeaky door, the flickering light. Next week he'd start fixing them. One problem at a time. One solution at a time. For the first time in a long time, Daniel fell asleep feeling excited about tomorrow. Not nervous or worried or invisible, just excited, because tomorrow he got to keep being who he was. And now finally that was enough.